She rode 800 miles to marry a man she had never met. She stepped off the stagecoach into a wind that smelled of coming snow, and she looked around for her husband. She did not find him. She found three mountain men, 40 miles of wilderness ahead, a winter coming that would close every pass until April, and a letter she was suddenly afraid had not told her the whole truth. This is the story of how Honora Whitcomb rode into Wyoming territory with $17 in her glove and a chair under her bedroom door 800 miles behind her, and how she found on a mountain called Blackwater Ridge the family she had been waiting for her whole life. Listen close. The wind is up, the fire is lit, and the three Holloway brothers are about to step out of the crowd. She stepped off the stagecoach into a wind that smelled of pine smoke and coming snow, and she looked around for the man who had promised to be her husband. She did not find him. She found three. Three men stood apart from the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stage roll into Caldwell Flats on that October afternoon in 1879. They stood the way brothers stand when they have spent their whole lives standing in a row. Same broad shoulders, same easy weight on the back foot, same quiet way of watching like men who had learned long ago that the world tells you most of what you need to know if you simply hold still and let it speak. Honora May Whitcomb pressed one small hand against the side of the stagecoach to steady herself. The wind pulled at the navy blue traveling dress she had worn for 9 days across half a continent. It pulled at the loose strands of honey blonde hair that had escaped from her modest pin. It pulled at the cameo brooch at her throat, the one her mother had worn before the cholera took her in 1871. The wind did not pull at the three men. The tallest of them stood in the middle. He was a head higher than any other man on that dusty street, and his shoulders filled out the dark wool coat he wore the way a barn door fills out its frame. His hat was pushed back, just enough to show a face weathered by mountain weather and mountain work, dark chestnut hair curling at his collar, a jaw that looked like it had been set against the world for a very long time and had never once given ground. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to firelight. He looked at her once head to foot the way a man looks at weather coming in from the west. Then he walked toward her without waiting to be waved over. The crowd parted for him. They did not part for him politely. They parted for him the way a creek parts for a stone. Behind him came the other two. The one on his left was nearly as tall, with a hair the color of dark wheat and eyes that took in everything at once and gave nothing back. He carried himself like a man who had spent a great many hours alone in the woods and preferred it that way. The one on his right was the youngest of the three, broad-shouldered and easy-moving, with a shy and crooked half-smile already starting at the corner of his mouth, as if smiling were a thing he could not quite help, even when the situation called for solemnity. The tallest one stopped 2 paces from her, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to give her air. "You would be Miss Whitcomb." His voice was low and slow, the voice of a man who had decided long ago that words were too valuable to spend foolishly. "I am. My name is Ezra Holloway. These are my brothers, Wesley," a small nod to the wheat-haired man, "and Tobias, though he answers to Toby." The youngest one tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am." Honora looked from one face to the next, and her stomach did a slow and frightened turn inside her. The advertisement she had answered, the one she had torn from a regional newspaper at her aunt's narrow kitchen table back in Kentucky, had said brothers. 3 brothers seeking a capable woman of good Christian character for marriage and household management. She had read those words 4 times. She had assumed it meant a family of brothers, the way a man might say, "I run the place with my brothers," meaning he was the one she would marry, and the others were simply the rest of the family. She had not understood that brothers was a number, 3 men, 40 miles of wilderness ahead, a winter coming in 3 weeks that would close every pass between this place and the rest of the world. Her hand tightened on the handle of her small traveling bag. Ezra Holloway saw it. He saw it the way a man sees the smallest thing on a long horizon and takes its measure without seeming to. He did not move closer. He did not reach for her bag. He did not crowd her. He spoke. There is something you should know before we go any further. She lifted her chin. I am listening. Our place is 40 miles up into the mountains. By wagon, that is most of a day. When the snows come, and they will come within 3 weeks of this conversation, neither pass back to this town will open again until April. If you ride out with us tonight, you ride out for a winter. There is no riding back. I want you to know that before you decide. He did not say it as a threat. He said it the way a doctor reads back a diagnosis, slow and clear, so a patient can take it in and ask the questions that matter. Honora looked at him. She looked at his hands calloused and scarred, at the knuckles hanging easy at his sides. She looked at his eyes, which had not once moved off her face since he stopped walking. She thought of Roy Pemberton and the chair she had wedged under her bedroom door in Kentucky every night for the last 6 months. She thought of the $17 folded into the lining of her glove. She thought of the line in his fourth letter, the one she had read so many times the paper had grown soft. Come on the 15th. We will speak plainly when you arrive. Bring only what you need. A man who would write 4 sentences for a letter would not waste them on a lie. I will go with you, Mr. Holloway. He nodded once. That was all. One small nod, as if a great matter had just been settled and there was no use making a speech about it. Then he reached for her bag and lifted it the way another man might lift a teacup, and he carried it toward a wagon waiting at the far end of the street. Behind her, she heard the murmuring start. She did not look back. The wagon ride out of Caldwell Flats took the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening. Toby drove. Ezra rode beside him on the bench. Wesley sat on the backboard with the supplies in the trunk he had loaded without being asked. His long legs stretched out, his eyes on the country behind them, and never once on the country ahead. Honora sat in the middle of the wagon bed on a folded wool blanket that someone, probably Toby, had laid out before they came into town. The blanket smelled of cedar. The wagon smelled of leather and sweat and hay and something else, something like cold stone and pine sap that she would later learn was simply the smell of the mountain itself. Toby was the one who talked. He pointed out the small things as the wagon climbed. A creek called Mountain Fork glittering through the pines, a stand of aspens whose leaves had already turned to gold coin and would be bare within the week. A ridge of dark pines they called Lone Pine Ridge, though there had not been a single lone pine on it in 20 years. He named the country to her the way a man names his house to a guest who has arrived for a long stay. That bend in the creek there, ma'am. Last spring we pulled a 6-pound trout out of that bend. Wes did. Wes never tells anyone, but I tell everyone because that is what younger brothers are for. Wesley behind her made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a clearing of his throat. Ezra did not speak. He sat beside Toby with his elbows on his knees and his hat pulled low, watching the road climb. Once, when the wagon hit a deep rut and Honora caught at the side rail to steady herself, he turned his head and looked at her over his shoulder. He did not speak. He only looked. And then he turned back to the road and shifted his shoulder just half an inch so that if the wagon hit another rut, his shoulder would catch her before the side rail did. She did not think he meant for her to notice. She noticed. The country grew bigger the higher they climbed. The pines got taller. The sky got wider. Twice she saw deer at the edge of the meadows, their ears swiveling, their bodies still as carved wood. Once she saw an eagle cross above the wagon low enough that she could hear the wind in its wings. She thought of Kentucky and how small the country had felt there. She thought of her aunt's kitchen and the chair under the door. She thought of her mother dead at 37 and her father dead at 40, and the 8 years she had spent since the cholera trying to make herself small enough to fit into other people's homes. The mountain did not ask her to be small. The mountain did not seem to care what size she was at all. Somewhere on that long road up, with the gold light slanting through the aspens and the smell of pine sap thick in her throat, she felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in 8 years. She did not name it. She did not look at it directly. She just sat with it the way a person sits with a stranger by a fire and does not yet ask his name. It was Ezra who finally spoke after they had climbed for nearly an hour without a word. There are some things you ought to know before we get to the house. I am listening, Mr. Holloway. Ezra, you are going to be my wife. There is no mister between us. Ezra, in our house you will have your own room. You will have your own bed. You will have your own door, and your door will lock from the inside, and the only person who will ever knock on it will be one of us, and only when there is a reason. Wesley and Toby will treat you the way they would treat a sister. They are not your husband. They are your kin. You understand the difference? I do. You will not be required to do work that does not suit you. If you wish to cook, the kitchen is yours. If you wish to keep the books, I will teach you the books. If you wish to plant a garden in the spring, Wes will turn the earth for you. If you wish to do none of those things, the house is still yours, and the food will still come, and no man will say a word against you. He paused. The wagon creaked over a flat stretch. I am not a man who takes what is not given. I want you to know that before we go in through the door. Honora looked at the back of his head, at the chestnut hair curling against the collar of his coat, at the slight tilt of his hat against the late sun. Thank you, Ezra. It is not a thing to thank a man for. It is the bare floor a man stands on. Behind her, she heard Wesley shift on the backboard. He did not speak, but she had the strong feeling, without being able to say why, that he had been waiting to hear his older brother say those words, and that hearing them had settled some small stone inside him that had been sitting crooked for a long time. The wagon climbed on. The sun was almost gone when they crested the last ridge. The road came around a stand of dark pines, and there below them, in a long cradle of meadow, lay the place. The two-story log house with the wide porch. The barn behind it, twice as big as the house, painted dark red years ago, and weathered now to a deep, dusty rose. The corral, the long sweep of pasture running down to the creek, the stand of cottonwoods marking the spring, and behind all of it, rising up and up against the sky already turning indigo, the snow-streaked face of the Wind River Range. Honora put one hand against her mouth. She did not mean to. She did not know she had done it until she felt the cold of her own fingers against her lower lip. Toby looked back at her. His shy, crooked smile came up full this time. Welcome to Blackwater Ridge, ma'am. The wagon rolled down the last slope toward the house, and the dogs came out from under the porch. Two of them, a black one and a tan one, both of them rangy and old and dignified. They did not bark. They came out and stood in the dust at the bottom of the porch steps and watched the wagon come in like elders at a doorway. Ezra stepped down first. He came around to the back of the wagon and offered Honora his hand. She took it. His hand was rough and hot and very steady, and when her boots touched the packed earth of the yard, he did not let go until she had her feet under her. Then he let go cleanly and stepped back and gave her room. Toby will show you the house. I will see to the horses. Wes will bring your trunk. He turned and led the team toward the barn. She watched him go for a moment. He walked the way he stood, like a man who had nothing to prove to anyone and nothing to apologize for. Toby was beside her then, hat in his hand. Whenever you are ready, ma'am. Honora, she said, if I am to be your sister, I will not be ma'am. His smile broke open. It was the first open smile she had seen on any of their faces all afternoon, and it changed his whole face. He looked 12 years old when he smiled like that. Honora, he said like he was tasting the word. Yes, ma'am. I mean, yes, Honora. She laughed. It was a small laugh, surprised out of her by the look on his face. But it was the first real laugh she had laughed in 3 months, and she felt it go down into her chest and warm something there. Behind her, Wesley said quietly, I will bring the trunk. She turned. He was standing at the back of the wagon, hands on the rail, looking at her with his pale eyes that took everything in and gave nothing back. He was not smiling, but he had said her name without saying it. He had heard her tell Toby to call her Honora, and his quiet, I will bring the trunk, had been an acknowledgement and a welcome and a promise all at once. She nodded to him. He nodded back. It was a contract. The house was bigger inside than she had imagined. The front room ran the full width of the front of the house, with a great fieldstone fireplace at one end and a long plank table at the other set for four. Two leather chairs faced the fire. A bearskin rug lay across the wide pine floorboards. There were no curtains on the tall windows because there was no one for 40 miles to look in. There was a Bible on a small table by one of the chairs, and beside the Bible, a book of Robert Burns, and the pages of the Burns were soft from being turned. Honora looked at the Burns. She did not say anything. The kitchen ran behind the front room, narrow and well-kept, with a heavy iron stove and a long workbench and shelves stocked with crocks of flour and salt and dried beans. A bunch of dried sage hung from a beam. A window over the workbench looked west toward the mountains, toward where the last red light was leaving the sky. The stairs went up from the front room to a landing. Toby led her up. "This one is yours." He pushed open a door. The room was small and clean. A pine bed with a quilt of dark blue and white squares. A washstand with a white pitcher and basin. A writing desk under the window. A small braided rug. A pine wardrobe. And on the writing desk, in a clear glass jar, a small bouquet of dried wildflowers, mostly mountain bluebell and what looked like the last papery heads of yarrow. Honora went to the desk. She touched the rim of the drawer with one finger. "Toby," she said quietly without turning, "who put these here?" There was a long pause behind her. "Wes did, ma'am, Honora. Wes did. He picked them 3 weeks back before the frost. Pressed them in a book to dry them. Put them up here this morning before we rode out to fetch you." Honora kept her finger on the rim of the jar. She did not turn around. She did not want Toby to see her face just then. "Tell him thank you for me," she said. "Tell him thank you tonight, not tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." He left her at the door and his boots went quiet down the stairs. She stood alone in the small, clean room. She put her bag on the bed. She walked to the window. The window looked out across the porch roof toward the dark shape of the barn, and beyond the barn the great rising face of the mountains turning purple now in the dusk. She put her hand flat against the cold glass. She breathed. For the first time in 8 years, she was somewhere where the chair did not need to go under the door. She did not put the chair under the door. She came down for supper an hour later, after she had washed her face and tied her hair back and put on her one other dress of soft gray wool. Toby had laid out the table. Wesley had cut bread. Ezra had carved the elk roast. The four of them sat down at the long plank table, and Ezra said grace in a voice so plain and unadorned that Honora, who had heard a great many graces, said with a great deal of show, felt the words go straight into her chest. "Lord, we thank you for this food. We thank you for this roof. We thank you for this woman who has come a long way to sit at our table. Keep her safe. Keep us all. Amen." "Amen," said Toby. "Amen," said Wesley soft. "Amen," said Honora. The food was good. The elk was tender. The bread was warm. The coffee was strong enough to walk on its own legs. Toby talked about the new bull he had bought in September. Wesley did not say much, but he passed the salt to her once before she asked, having watched her glance at it. Ezra ate slowly and watched his brothers and his new wife and said little. When the meal was done, Honora rose to clear the plates. 3 chairs scraped. "Sit down, Honora," Ezra said in the same plain voice he had used for Grace. "You rode 9 days to get here. The plates can wait until tomorrow, or Toby will do them or I will. Tonight you sit by the fire. It is no trouble to me. It is no trouble to me either, and I am the one offering. Sit." She sat. Toby cleared the plates. Wesley brought a kettle off the stove and made tea, real tea, in a brown teapot that looked like it had not been used in a long time. He set the cup beside her elbow at the leather chair by the fire. He did not say anything. He just set the cup down and went back to help his brother with the dishes. Honora wrapped both hands around the cup. The fire popped. One of the dogs came in from the porch and lay down on the bearskin rug, at her feet, sighed, and went to sleep. Ezra came over after a while and sat in the other leather chair with his own cup of coffee, and the two of them watched the fire without speaking for a long stretch of time. "You are not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" He thought about that. He took his time. Someone more frightened. Someone who would need a great deal of careful handling. The wording in your letters was straight, but I have known a great many people whose letters did not match the woman who arrived. "Oh, I am frightened, Ezra. I am simply not going to show you that on the first night." He looked at her, the whiskey-colored eyes held on her face for a long moment. "I see." He looked back at the fire. "For what it is worth, there is nothing in this house that should frighten you." She did not answer that, not because she did not believe him, because she did believe him, and the belief was so new and so fragile that she did not trust herself to put words to it without breaking it. She drank her tea. The fire popped. The dog snored. Outside, the wind came down off the mountain and pressed against the log walls of the house, and the house took the wind the way it had taken every wind for 40 years and did not move. A man keeps his word. Ezra had said somewhere on the long road up, not as a speech, as a thing said in passing when Toby had asked if he had remembered to pick up the new harness rivets at the freight office. "A man keeps his word, Toby. I said I would bring them." Honora kept that line in her chest like a small warm coal. She would learn in the days and weeks to come that "a man keeps his word" was a sentence Ezra Holloway said often, and that he said it without making any large thing of it, and that every man and woman and mule and horse on Blackwater Ridge had organized their entire understanding of the world around the fact that when Ezra Holloway said a thing would happen, the thing happened. It was a small line. It was the floor of the house. The first 3 days at Blackwater Ridge were a slow and careful learning. Toby taught her the kitchen. He showed her the iron stove with its temperamental damper, the cold cellar dug into the hill behind the house, the smokehouse where strips of elk and venison hung in the cool dark. He showed her the dairy leaned to where they kept the milk from the 2 milk cows and the egg basket that lived on a peg by the back door, because the hens had figured out how to lay in the rafters of the barn, and any sensible person needed to be able to grab the basket and go. He talked the entire time, and Honora led him because Toby's talking was not the talking of a man trying to fill silence. It was the talking of a young man who had been a little lonely for a long time and had a sister now and meant to make the most of her. Wesley taught her the country. On the second day, he asked very quietly if she would like to walk down to the creek with him to check the trap line. She said yes. He gave her a heavier shawl from a peg by the door. His own shawl, she suspected, though he did not say so, and they walked out across the meadow with the bikes trotting alongside. He named things as they walked. Mountain bluebell, though dry now. Sagebrush. Indian paintbrush that had bloomed in summer. The track of a mule deer, narrow and pointed. The track of a coyote, narrower than a dog's. He did not lecture. He named, and then he was quiet, and then he named the next thing. By the time they came back to the house, Honora knew the names of 9 plants and 4 animal tracks, and she had not once felt taught down to. Ezra taught her the books. On the 3rd evening after supper, he laid out the ledgers on the long plank table and showed her how he kept the cattle counts. The supply runs the wages for the 2 ranch hands who came up in the spring, the notes from the bank in Cheyenne. His hand moved down the columns the way his voice moved through a sentence. Slow, plain, no waste. "You read a fair hand," she said, looking at the rows. "My mother taught me. She taught all of us. She was a school teacher in Tennessee before she came west with my father." It was the first thing he had said to her about his parents. She did not push him. She only nodded and looked at the ledger. He did not say more, but she filed the line away. Tennessee. School teacher. There was a story behind those 2 words, and she would hear it when he was ready to tell it, and not before. On the 4th morning, she found Wesley's journal. It was not hidden. It was sitting on the desk in a small study off the front room where she had gone to dust because the dust had been bothering her since the first day. It was a leather-bound book, the leather cracked at the spine, the pages thick and rough. It lay closed beside an ink pot and a pen and a stack of pressed leaves held down by a smooth river stone. She did not open it. She picked up the cloth she had brought to dust with, and she dusted around the journal without moving it, and she dusted the desk, and the chair, and the windowsill, and she went out of the room, and she closed the door behind her, and she did not mention the journal to anyone. But she thought about it. A man who kept a journal, a man who pressed leaves and dry flowers, a man who had slipped a quiet bouquet into her room before he had ever met her, was not a man without an inner country. Wesley Holloway was the most silent of the three brothers, but he was not the smallest of them. He was simply the deepest. She thought about what it might be to be friends with him. She thought she might like to try. On the fifth afternoon, she tried to carry a full water bucket from the well to the kitchen herself, and she slipped on the wet plank of the back step and went down hard on her hip, the water sloshing out across her skirt and the porch boards. Toby got there first. He had been splitting wood on the side of the house, and he came around the corner laughing already because he had heard the splash and known exactly what it was. 4 days, Honora. 4 days you held out trying to do everything yourself. I thought you would last a week. She glared up at him from the wet step. Tobias Holloway, if you laugh again, I am going to throw this bucket at you. That is the first time anyone has called me Tobias since my mama died. I knew you would fit in. He squatted down and held out a hand. She took it, and he pulled her up easy like she weighed nothing. Wesley came up from the barn, saw the situation, said nothing, picked up the empty bucket, and walked to the well. He drew a fresh bucket without a word and carried it inside. Ezra came around the corner of the house last. He stopped when he saw her, standing wet and red-faced on the step with Toby still grinning at her. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He just looked at her for a long moment, and then he came up onto the porch and stood close enough that his shoulder almost touched hers but did not. You all right? Bruised pride. Pride heals. Hips do not always. I am fine, Ezra. All right, he looked at Toby. Stop laughing at your sister. Toby tried to stop laughing. He could not. He went around the corner of the house with his shoulders shaking and the axe over his shoulder, and a moment later they heard him laughing again from the side yard. Ezra looked back at Honora. The corner of his mouth did something. Just the corner. Not a smile. Not exactly. But it moved, and it moved warmly, and Honora caught it. Winter always ends, he said, but pride takes longer to mend than hip bones in my experience. Is that a Holloway saying? It is a thing my mother used to say. She said a great many things. I remember most of them. He held out his hand to help her down off the step. She took it. She did not let go right away. He did not pull his hand back. For a slow second, the two of them stood there on the wet porch with their hands joined in the cold afternoon air, and the wind came down off the mountain, and somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet, and Honora thought, oh. Then she let go because it was the first week and she had her own pride, and she did not yet trust the new thing in her chest enough to hold a man's hand for longer than a steadying. He let her hand go cleanly. He did not say anything about it. But that night at supper, when he passed the bread to her, his fingers brushed the back of her hand, and she knew the way a person knows weather that the brush was not an accident. The first time she went into Caldwell Flats with Toby was on the 8th day. They needed thread and bolts of plain cotton and a small list of dry goods, and Toby had asked if she would like to come along. He had asked it casually, the way he asked everything, but Honora suspected Ezra had told him to ask. Ezra wanted her to see the town now in the daylight, with a brother beside her before she saw it for the first time on her wedding day, with the whole place watching. The wedding was set for 3 days out. The Reverend Hollis Dunbar had agreed to it. He had not agreed easily. Toby had told her about it on the way down. Reverend Dunbar had asked for 2 weeks of posting, by which he had meant he wanted time to see if the engagement might quietly fall apart on its own. Ezra had said 3 days. They had settled at 3 days by way of one of those compromises that left no one happy, but allowed each man to walk out of the room with his back straight. Toby drove the wagon. He sang sometimes soft scraps of an Irish song his mother had taught him. He told her about the town as they came down out of the foothills, the hardware store run by a man named Ottinger, the freight office, the two saloons, the respectable one and the other one, the schoolhouse, which doubled as the church on Sundays, and the dance hall on Saturday nights when there was a dance, which was not often. The doctor, Ambrose Larkin, who was a good man and a good doctor and not afraid of mountain weather. The sheriff, Beauregard Mason, called Beau, who Toby said was the only honest sheriff the county had had in 20 years. The general store run by Tilda Harding and her husband, though her husband was failing now, and most of the running was Tilda. Tilda's good people, Toby said, but the women who come into Tilda's store are not always good people. You will hear some talk in there today, sister. I want you ready for it. What kind of talk? He looked over at her. The shy, crooked smile was gone. Toby Holloway, when he was not smiling, looked older than 27. He looked like a man who had been standing in his older brother's shadow for 7 years and watching the town that had spat on his family from the other side of the street. They will say that no decent woman travels 9 days for a man she has never met. They will say that no Christian woman moves into a house with 3 bachelors. They will say that whatever arrangement we have at Blackwater Ridge is not the kind of arrangement a town should have in it. And what will you say? I will say nothing in there, Honora, because if I say what I want to say, Ezra will have to come into town tomorrow and clean it up. But I will stand close to you, and if any one of those women looks at you wrong, she will have to look at me too. And I am the easygoing brother. He glanced at her sideways. You should see Wes when he is not easygoing. She had not laughed since the bucket on the step. She laughed now, a short, surprised laugh that she did not try to swallow. Toby's smile came back. There she is, he said almost to himself. The wagon rattled into Caldwell Flats just before noon. Tilda Harding's general store smelled of cinnamon and lamp oil and old wood. Tilda herself was behind the counter, a small, spare woman with iron gray hair and sharp blue eyes, and she greeted Toby by name and gave Honora a long and not unkind looking over before nodding once and saying, You will be Mrs. Holloway soon, I hear. Miss Whitcomb for 3 days more, ma'am? Tilda, just Tilda. What can I get you? Honora gave her the list. Tilda began to assemble it. It was while Tilda was at the back of the store fetching the last of the cotton bolts that the 2 women came in. They did not see her at first. They were deep in their own conversation, and they came through the door talking, and the bell over the door did not register because they were the kind of women who had been coming through that door together every Tuesday for 15 years, and the bell had stopped meeting them. I just do not understand it. 3 of them, 3 men, and 1 little slip of a girl from heaven knows where. Letters. She came on letters, Beulah. A girl who answers letters from 3 bachelors at once is not the kind of girl you want sitting in your pew on a Sunday. And not a one of them has set foot in that church in 7 years. 7 years, Maud. That tells you everything you need to know about what kind of arrangement this is. Honora set her gloves down on the counter very quietly. She did not turn around right away. She took 1 slow breath in the way her mother had taught her to take a breath before saying a hard thing, and then she turned. The 2 women saw her. The color came up in both of their faces at once. Honora did not raise her voice. She did not change her expression. She walked the 4 steps across the worn pine floor of Tilda Harding's general store, and she stopped a polite distance from the 2 women, and she folded her hands in front of her the way her mother had folded her hands in front of her when she had something to say to a woman of consequence in church. Good morning. The taller of the 2 opened her mouth. She closed it. My name is Honora Whitcomb, Honora said, still in the same level voice. I am from Harlan County, Kentucky. I came west on letters because my parents are dead, and the home I lived in was not a home I could remain in, and a man named Ezra Holloway wrote 4 letters to me in his own hand telling me that if I came to Wyoming Territory, I would have my own room and my own door, and that no harm would come to me under his roof. I have been in his house for 8 days. He has kept his word. His brothers have kept his word with him. I will marry him in 3 days at your church in front of your reverend, and any woman who would like to come and watch is welcome to come and watch." She paused. The store was very quiet. Tilda Harding had stopped sorting cotton bolts at the back and was standing with one hand on a shelf listening. "I do not ask you to like me," Honora went on. "I do not ask you to receive me. I only ask that you not say things in a public store about a man and his brothers who have not been here to defend themselves. If you have something to say about the Holloways, you may come to Blackwater Ridge and say it to their faces. I will stand at the door and let you in." She picked up her gloves. She turned to Tilda. "I will come back for the rest of the order in an hour, Tilda. I think Toby and I will take some air." "Yes," said Tilda quietly. "I will have it ready." Honora walked out of the store. The bell over the door rang clean behind her. Toby was waiting on the bench in front of the store, tipped back against the wall, one boot up. He took one look at her face as she came out, and he did not ask what had happened. He stood up. He walked beside her down the boardwalk without a word until they were a full block from the store, and then he said very quietly, "Are you all right?" She stopped. She put one hand against the wall of the freight office. She let herself shake for one slow breath. Then she straightened up. She tucked a loose strand of hair back behind her ear. She looked at Toby. "I am all right. You will need to be all right twice more before this winter is out, Honora. You know that. I know it. All right, then come on. There is a thing called a sticky bun at the bakery on the next block, and Ezra gave me money to buy you one because he said you would need one today, and Ezra is generally right about these things." She let him take her elbow. They walked down the boardwalk together. The brother and the new sister and the people of Caldwell Flats watched them through their windows, and the talk of the town moved in slow currents around them, and Honora Whitcomb lifted her chin and walked the way her mother had walked when her mother had had something to bear. That night after supper, she sat on the porch with Ezra. The temperature had dropped. There was the smell of true cold in the air, now the kind of cold that is a promise and not a warning. "Toby told me what happened in town. I expected he would. You did well. I am tired, Ezra. I know it." He did not move closer. He did not put his arm around her. He simply sat there beside her in his chair, and the dogs lay between them on the boards, and the cold came down off the mountain. And after a while he said in his slow, plain voice, "There is something you should know before the wedding, and something about my family, about why this town looks at us the way it does." She turned her head. He was looking out across the dark meadow toward the black wall of the mountain. "Will you tell me?" "I will tell you, but not tonight. Tonight you are tired. Tomorrow you and I will walk out to the North Hill, and I will tell you there. I would rather tell you in the place where it happened than in this house." "All right, Ezra." He nodded. The wind came down off the mountain. Somewhere out past the corral in the dark, a wolf called once long and low and ragged. The dogs at their feet lifted their heads. Ezra did not move, but Honora saw his hand close slow and certain around the rifle that had been leaning against his chair the whole time, without her noticing it was there. "Wes," he called quietly into the open doorway behind them. "Heard him," came Wesley's voice just as quiet from somewhere inside the house. The wolf called again. "Closer." Ezra stood up. He held one hand out to Honora palm, down finger steady, inside Honora. "Just for now." She stood. She went inside. She did not argue. She did not flinch. But as she crossed the threshold, she looked back, and she saw the three Holloway brothers gathering in the dark of the porch, three tall shapes with three long rifles, the way they had probably gathered 100 times before she ever stepped down off that stagecoach. And she understood as the door closed behind her that whatever Ezra was going to tell her tomorrow on the North Hill, it was the reason these three men had been alone for 7 years. It was the reason the town had turned its face away. It was the reason a wolf calling in the dark made all three of them reach for a rifle without a word spoken between them. And tomorrow on the North Hill, she was going to learn it. The morning after the wolf, Ezra walked her up the North Hill alone. He had said he would tell her there in the place where it had happened, and he kept his word the way he kept all his words. The hill rose behind the house in a long, slow climb of yellow grass and dark pines, and at the top, beneath a single bent cottonwood tree, were two granite stones standing side by side in the earth. The names had been carved by hand: John Holloway, Mary Holloway. Beneath each name was a single date: August 1872. Ezra took off his hat. He stood for a long moment looking down at the stones. Then he told her. They came in the night, 5 of them. The Strode brothers, 4 of them, and one cousin who rode with them. They wanted the cattle. My father met them at the door with his rifle. My mother came out behind him with her shotgun. By the time Wesley and I came down the stairs and Toby came in from the barn, my father was on the ground and my mother was on her knees beside him, and the 5 men were in the yard. Toby shot 2 of them. I shot 1. The 4th came at me with a knife, and Hiram, the youngest of the Strode brothers, shot his own kin in the back to silence him, and then Hiram rode out alone before any of us could mount a horse. We carried our parents up this hill the next morning. We dug the graves ourselves. The Caldwell Church refused to bury them on consecrated ground because of an old rumor my father had brought with him out of Tennessee, a rumor that was not true. We have not entered that church in 7 years. That is why the town looks at us the way it does. Honora was weeping by the time he finished. He did not reach for her. He simply stood beside her in the wind and let her weep. When she could speak again, she said, "And you have looked for him, the one called Strode. For 7 years, we have not found him. We have stopped looking mostly. The mountain has been enough." She put her hand on the front of his coat. "Ezra, I'm sorry for all of it." "I know you are." They walked down the hill together. He held her hand the whole way down. He did not let go until they reached the porch. The wolf had not come back. Wesley had ridden the perimeter at first light and found the tracks circling and then turning south away from the cattle, away from the house. It was a young wolf, he had said, hungry and alone. It had not been hunting them. It had only been passing through. The stranger came on horseback 2 days after the night of the wolf, and he came alone. Honora was hanging wash on the line behind the kitchen when she heard hooves on the frozen road. A single horse, slow gait, tired. She paused with one of Toby's shirts half-pinned, the cold wooden clothespin pressed between her fingers, and she listened. She had learned in her 10 days at Blackwater Ridge to listen to the land the way Wesley had taught her. The land told you things if you let it. A single horse coming up the road slow and steady was not a friend. Friends rode faster. Friends called out from the bend by the cottonwoods. This was a man who did not want to announce himself until he was already at the door. She set down the basket of wet laundry. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She walked around the side of the house without hurry, but without lingering either. By the time she reached the front yard, the rider had already pulled up at the porch. He sat his horse with the easy slouch of a man who had spent his life in saddles. 40 years old, perhaps a little older. A lean, weathered face, a long scar that ran from the corner of his right eye down through his cheek to his jaw, the kind of scar that had been put there by something with intention. He wore a dark canvas duster stained gray with road dust and a black hat pulled low. Toby came out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag. His face went still in the way Honora was beginning to recognize. The Toby she knew, the one who hummed while he worked and made up names for the horses, was gone. In his place was a man who had once been 20 years old in a yard full of dead men. That Toby was looking at the rider now. "Silas Crane." The rider tipped his hat back an inch. "Tobias, you grew. 7 years will do that to a man. What do you want?" "To talk to your brother. To Ezra. Alone if I can." "You can wait on the porch." The rider dismounted. Honora watched him tie his horse to the rail with the same unhurried care he did everything else. Then she went inside through the kitchen door without being told. She did not need to be told. There was a way the men of this house spoke about the world, and a way they spoke about old wounds, and she had learned the difference already. But she stayed. She stood by the kitchen window with her hands in the dishwater, and the back door cracked open just enough to hear, and she did not move when Wesley came down from the loft and stood beside her without speaking. Wesley did not ask why she was listening. Wesley understood that a woman who had crossed 800 miles to marry into this family had earned the right to know what was riding up to its door. The voices came through the open parlor window in fragments. The man Silas Crane spoke first low and even. He spoke for a long time. Honora could only catch pieces. Cheyenne, a saloon, a face he had not seen in 7 years. A scar he remembered, a name he was sure of now. Then Ezra's voice, quieter still, but carrying that weight he never lost. You are certain. I am certain he is alive. He knows you are still up here, and he is moving toward this country. How long? A month, maybe less. He was asking after you in Laramie 3 weeks ago. He had money, new boots. He was not running anymore. He was hunting. A long silence. Honora did not breathe. Why are you telling me this, Silas? You owe me nothing. I owe your father. He pulled me out of a creek in 70 when I had no business being alive. He never asked for anything back. I am paying it now, that is all. And the price. There is no price, Ezra. Feed my horse. Let me sleep in your barn one night. I will be gone at first light. Another silence. Then Ezra's voice, even quieter. You will sleep in the house. You will eat at our table. My wife is a Christian woman, and you are a guest. The barn is not for guests. I am not your wife yet, Honora said softly to the window. Wesley beside her made a small sound that was almost a laugh. He had not laughed in the days she had known him. The sound surprised her enough that she turned and looked at him. His amber eyes were on the window, but something in his face had loosened. You will be, he said, tomorrow morning. He counts you already. She did not know what to say to that, so she did not say anything. She turned back to the dishes and she scrubbed a cup that did not need scrubbing. Silas Crane stayed one night. He ate stew at their table in silence. He told 3 stories about her father-in-law, the man called John Holloway, who had pulled him from a Wyoming creek in winter and had given him dry clothes and had not asked his name. He told them like a man paying a debt with words because he had nothing else to give. Toby cried quietly into his coffee. Wesley did not cry, but he did not look up from his bowl either. Ezra sat at the head of the table with his hands folded in front of him and listened the way a man listens at his own father's grave. When Crane left at dawn, Ezra walked him to his horse. They spoke briefly. Crane rode out into the gray light and did not look back. Ezra came back into the kitchen. Honora was there alone kneading the morning bread. He stood in the doorway and watched her hands work the dough. You heard. I heard most of it. I would have told you tonight. I know. He did not move from the doorway. His name is Hiram Strode. He was 24 years old that night. He would be 31 now. He was the one who got away. We have looked for him for 7 years. We did not find him. Now he is finding us. Her hands were still in the dough. She did not look up. What does he want? I do not know yet, but a man does not come back after 7 years to settle an old grudge. He comes back because he wants something. We will know soon. She turned then. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked across the kitchen, and she stood in front of him, and she put her flour-dusted hand flat against the front of his shirt. Ezra Holloway, listen to me. I have lived all my life with men who kept things from me to spare me. I do not need to be spared. I need to know. If we are going to be married tomorrow, you do not lock doors in this house against me. Do you understand me? He looked at her for a long moment. Something very small shifted in his jaw, the smallest possible motion. I understand you. Then we are going to be all right. He covered her hand with his own. His hand was so much larger than hers that it covered both her hand and the front of his shirt. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He held her hand against his chest for a count of 10 heartbeats, and then he let her go and went out to the barn to start the day. The wedding was held at Caldwell Flats on the Saturday morning, October the 25th, 1879, at 8 o'clock in the morning, with a frost on the church windows and the sound of horses stamping in the cold outside. Honora wore a simple white dress that had appeared on the porch of Blackwater Ridge 2 nights before, folded in brown paper with no signature on the note that came with it. The note read only, "I have been wrong about many things. Please accept this from a woman who is trying to be better. Tilda Harding." Wesley walked her down the aisle. She had asked him the night before. She had stood in the doorway of his reading room, the one he kept lit with 2 oil lamps, even when the rest of the house was dark, and she had said, "Wesley, you were the first person in this family to call me sister. I would like you to give me away tomorrow." He had not answered for almost a full minute. Then he had set down the book he was holding. Then he had stood up. And then awkwardly, like a man trying on a coat he had not worn in years, he had crossed the room, and he had taken her hand in both of his, and he had said, "It would be my honor." That was all. That was the whole speech. But when she walked down the aisle of the Caldwell Church on his arm the next morning, she felt his hand trembling just slightly under hers, and she understood that there were some honors a man did not have words for. Toby stood as best man beside Ezra. The 3 brothers wore matching white shirts and black vests, their hats held in their hands, their hair combed flat with water, their boots polished. They looked, she thought, like 3 men attending the most important event of their lives, which is exactly what they were. Reverend Hollis Dunbar performed the service. His voice was steadier than it had been the first time he had spoken to Ezra about the matter. Something had changed in him in the days since the brothers had walked out of his front room with a wedding date in hand. He was still not a warm man, but he was a fair one now. And when he said the words, "Do you, Ezra Holloway, take this woman?" his voice carried across the small wooden sanctuary with a kind of grave dignity that made Honora's eyes fill. Ezra slid the silver band onto her finger. He had made it himself, he had told her the night before, from one of his mother's old silver coins. She felt the weight of it settle into place as if it had always belonged there. She looked up. Ezra was looking at her with his face entirely open. No guard, no distance, no quietness held in reserve. Just a man looking at his wife. The kiss was brief, the kind of kiss a man gives a woman in front of and a country preacher in the eyes of a small frontier town. It tasted of cold air and coffee. It lasted 3 seconds, perhaps 4. But when she pulled back and looked at him, she understood that the rest of her life had just been decided, and she was glad. The reception was held in the front room of Tilda Harding's store. Tilda had cleared the dry goods to the walls and laid a long table covered with a white cloth and set out plates of cold ham and biscuits and a tall yellow cake. 11 people came. It was more than the brothers had expected. It was fewer than a proper wedding deserved. Tilda Harding hugged Honora at the door. She held the embrace longer than was customary. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. "I am sorry, dear. I said unkind things in this very store. I have thought about them every night since. Please forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive, Mrs. Harding." "There is, and I will spend the rest of my life proving I meant the apology." Toby played his fiddle. The Reverend Dunbar drank coffee in the corner and watched the small celebration with an expression that was almost peaceful. Wesley, of all people, sang. He stood near the fire with his hands clasped behind his back, and he sang an old Irish song his mother had taught him when he was a boy, a slow song about a man going home to a green country he could see from the deck of a ship. His voice was rough from disuse, but it was true. Honora watched his face while he sang. She thought, this man has been silent for 7 years, and now he is singing at my wedding. Whatever else this life brings, it has already given me this. The door closed behind them when they reached the house that night, and the wind pulled at the eaves and the first snow of the winter began to fall outside the windows. What happened in that house that night was theirs alone. By morning, when the gray light came through the sole bedroom window, and Honora opened her eyes, she understood that she was no longer the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in a dusty town. She was someone new. She was a wife. The first storm came 8 days after the wedding. It came down out of the Wind River Range on a Tuesday afternoon, and it kept coming for 3 days. By Thursday morning, the South Pass was closed, and by Friday, the East Pass had drifted shut. And on Saturday, Ezra came in from the barn, shaking snow from his coat, and said quietly, "We are in for the winter now. Whatever we have not done before today, we will not do until April." Honora stood at the window and watched the snow come down. It fell straight when the wind died and slantwise when it returned. The world outside was being erased one slow inch at a time, 40 miles to the nearest town. No way out, no way in. 3 months at the very least. Perhaps 4. Just the 4 of them and the cattle in the barn and the firewood in the shed and whatever they had stored in the root cellar. She thought, this is what I came for. I just did not know it. She found a way to live in it. She rose before the sun. She built up the fire. She put the coffee on. She made bread 3 times a week and stew most evenings and biscuits on Sunday mornings. She learned to count her flour and beans and dried meat against the days remaining until spring. She learned that Wesley took his coffee black and Toby took his with cream when they had cream, and Ezra took his however she made it because he did not believe a man should complain about coffee his wife had risen at 5 in the morning to brew. Wesley taught her to shoot. He set up cans on the back fence on the 3rd week of November, a clear, cold day with the snow crisp underfoot, and he stood behind her with his big, patient hands guiding her shoulders into the right stance. He spoke very little. He showed her how to brace her feet, how to settle the rifle into the hollow of her shoulder, how to hold her breath at the moment of pulling the trigger. The first 3 shots she missed entirely. The 4th grazed a can. The 5th knocked it cleanly off the post. She turned to him with a flushed face. He nodded once, that was all. But the nod meant, you can do this thing and you will not need rescuing if you find yourself alone. That night by the fire, she said to him, "Wes, why did you teach me to shoot?" He looked up from his book. He considered the question seriously the way he considered most things. "Because winter is long," he said, "and because a woman in this country should not have to wait for a man to defend her own life." Then he went back to his book. Toby taught her to bake biscuits the way his mother had baked them, with the lard cut and cold and the dough handled as little as possible. He stood beside her at the kitchen counter on a Sunday morning and showed her with his big, careful hands how to fold the dough, how to know when to stop. He talked the whole time. Toby always talked. He told her about his mother, about the way she had hummed in the kitchen, about the songs she had sung in Gaelic when she did not know the children were listening. He told her about the fiddle which had been his mother's father's. He told her that he had not been able to play it for almost a year after his parents died, and then one night Ezra had taken it out of its case and put it in his hands and said, "Play. Mother would want you to play." "And did you?" Honora asked. "I did, and then I cried for an hour, and then I played some more." She put her flour-dusted hand on his sleeve. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet, but not in a sad way. He smiled the way he smiled when he was being honest about a hard thing. "You are good for this house, sister," he said. "You have brought music back." Ezra taught her the books. He sat with her at the long parlor table after supper, the lamp between them. The ledger spread out, and he showed her how the ranch ran: cattle counts, hay reserves, wages owed to the 2 ranch hands who came in summer, loans against the land, notes from the bank in Cheyenne. He explained each line with the same patient gravity he brought to everything. She asked questions. He answered every one. He never once made her feel she had asked a foolish thing. One night, very late, when the fire was low and the house was asleep around them, she put her hand on top of his hand on the open ledger. "Ezra, why are you teaching me this? A husband does not usually teach his wife the books." He looked at her in the lamplight. He was very tired. The day had been long. "Because if anything happens to me, this place must not fall apart. If you know the books, you will know what to sell and what to keep and what to fight for. I will not leave you helpless. I will never leave you helpless. Nothing is going to happen to you. Many things are going to happen to Mahonora. Some of them already have. I am only making sure that none of them will leave you stranded. She did not answer. She lifted his hand from the ledger and held it against her cheek. He let her. They sat like that for a long time. The fire popped in the grate. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. And in that silence, something settled between them that could never shift back. Christmas Eve came down on Blackwater Ridge in a slow, heavy snow that began at noon and was still falling at midnight. By 11, Wesley and Toby had gone to bed. They had been up the night before until almost dawn working on something they would not let her see. There was wood shavings in Toby's hair at supper that he had pretended not to know about. There was a small leather-bound something tucked under Wesley's arm when he came down for the evening that he had pretended not to be hiding. Honora sat by the fire in the parlor with her knitting in her lap. She was making a scarf for Ezra dark gray wool plain. He had said he did not need a scarf. She was making him one anyway. Ezra sat across from her in his father's old chair with a piece of pine wood in his hands. He was carving. He had been carving for weeks now. She had not asked what it was. He had not told her. The shape was small and curved and patient under his knife. The clock on the mantel ticked. The fire popped. She set down her knitting. Ezra, may I ask you something? Yes. Why did you write that letter? The first one. The advertisement in the paper. He did not look up from the carving. He turned the piece of wood in his hand slowly, considering the grain. That is a long answer. We have all night. He set down the knife. He set down the wood. He folded his hands between his knees and he looked into the fire. 7 years after my mother and father died, I realized something about this house. It had gone quiet. Too quiet. Wesley used to sing. He stopped. He read instead. Toby used to laugh at supper. He stopped. He hummed alone in the barn instead. And Honora, I forgot how to do either one. I was the oldest. I held this place together. I worked the cattle and I paid the loans and I kept my brothers fed and I kept us alive. But I forgot how to be a man. I was only an oldest brother. There is a difference. He paused. He looked up at her then. I did not write that letter for a wife, Tasty. I wrote it because I knew the way a man knows when something is broken inside him, that this house needed someone from outside. Someone who did not know our story. Someone who would walk in this door and see 3 men instead of 3 orphans. I told my brothers it was a practical arrangement. A woman to manage the household. Wesley and Toby agreed because they trusted me. I do not know that I trusted myself. He stopped. The fire popped. And then you stepped off that stagecoach, with your shoulders straight, even though your hands were shaking. And you walked into Tilda Harding's store the next week, and you did not flinch when those women whispered. And Toby came home that night, and he cried at the supper table for the first time in 7 years. Not because you had been hurt, because someone had thanked him for being a brother. I went out to the barn after that, and I put my head against my father's old saddle, and I said, Pa, I think she is going to save us. I think she is going to bring us back. She was crying. She had not meant to cry. He stood up from the chair. He crossed the small space between them. He sank down to one knee on the rag rug in front of her chair, and he took both her hands in both of his. Honora May Whitcomb Holloway, I do not know exactly when I fell in love with you. I think it was the first time you stood up in this kitchen and told me not to lock my doors against you. But I have been in love with you every day since, and I will love you until this mountain falls into the sea. She slid forward off the chair into his arms. He held her there on the rag rug in front of the fire while the snow fell outside and the clock ticked and the small piece of carved pine wood lay on the table beside them, beginning to take the shape of a cradle no one had spoken about yet. You are home now, he said into her hair. You are home now, Nora. You are home. It was the first time he had ever called her Nora. She would carry the sound of it for the rest of her life. The accident came in the second week of February, On a Tuesday so cold the breath of the cattle in the barn turned to ice on their muzzles, and the snow that had fallen the night before lay 3 feet deep on the level and twice that in the drifts. Toby went out at dusk to check the south pen. He had been worried about a heifer that was close to her time, and he wanted to make sure the windbreak was holding. He took a lantern. He told Honora he would be back in an hour. She watched him cross the yard from the kitchen window, his long legs breaking through the crust of snow, the small yellow circle of his lantern bobbing once twice before it disappeared behind the bulk of the barn. An hour passed, then a second hour. Then the wind shifted and brought the cold down out of the north, and Honora knew the way a woman knows that something was wrong. She did not say anything to Ezra. She did not need to. He was already pulling on his coat. He was already lacing his boots tight against the cold. Wesley appeared from the loft with a rifle and a coil of rope over his shoulder. The two brothers looked at each other once across the kitchen, and then they were out the door without a word, two lanterns and two long shadows moving fast across the dark snow. Honora stood at the window with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass. She did not pray. She had stopped praying for things she could not control. She only watched the lanterns until they vanished beyond the barn, and then she put more wood on the fire, and she put water on the stove, and she got the medicine box down from the high shelf because she knew that whatever they brought back, it would need her ready. They came back 40 minutes later. Wesley first breaking trail, then Ezra carrying Toby across his shoulders the way a man carries a deer he has shot, with Toby's broken legs hanging loose and his face the color of fresh paper. Both legs, below the knee on the right, the shin on the left. She did not scream. She did not weep. She held the door open and she said quietly, "Bring him to the parlor, the big table. Wesley, get the kettle. Ezra, get the splints from the cellar." She had never set a broken bone in her life. She had read once in a book her mother had owned about home medicine, how it was done. She remembered every word now. She remembered the way a person remembers a verse from the Bible when they are drowning. The book had said, "Set the bone before the swelling rises." The book had said, "Do it fast and do it once and do not flinch." She did not flinch. Toby cried out once when she straightened the right leg. He cried out a second time, much worse, when she pulled the left. After that, he passed out, and that was a mercy because the splinting took almost an hour, and the wrapping took another, and by the time they had him laid on the cleared parlor table with his legs straight and bound, and a folded blanket under his head, his face was the color of ash. Wesley stood at the foot of the table with both his hands on the wood. He had not spoken since they came in. "He needs laudanum," Honora said, "and morphine. The wounds are clean, but the shock will kill him before the bones do if we cannot get the pain down. We have to send for Dr. Larkin." Ezra was already at the wall map. The wall map showed the country from Caldwell Flats north to the Yellowstone. He had drawn the passes himself in pencil over the years, and he tapped one of them now with a forefinger that was perfectly steady. Devil's Pass. Wesley's head came up. "No, Tom, there is no other way. The South Road is shut. The East is shut. Devil's Pass is the only way down to Caldwell in February. Devil's Pass kills men who try it in summer. In February, it is suicide." Then I had better not fail. Wesley took 2 long steps around the table. He came up close to his older brother, and he spoke low and fast the way a man speaks when he is afraid for someone and ashamed of being afraid. "Ezra, listen to me. I am the better tracker. I am younger. Send me. You are the better tracker. That is exactly why you are staying. If I do not come back in 6 days, you will be the one who has to keep all of them alive until April. You will have to feed the cattle. You will have to set Toby's fever when it comes. You will have to keep Nora safe. I cannot trust that to anyone but you." Wesley closed his eyes. He nodded once. That was all. "4 days down, 2 days back," Ezra said. "I take the gray mare. She has the best lungs. I take 3 days of food. Wesley, you will see Dr. Larkin's note when I bring it back. You will follow it exactly." I will. Nora. She had been standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. I am going to put on every coat in this house, Ezra said. I am going to take the rifle and the long knife and the flint and the spare ammunition. I am going to be back in 6 days. Do you understand me? I understand you. Say it. You are coming back. I am coming back. He kissed her. It was a hard, brief kiss with cold lips and the smell of wood smoke in his beard, and it was different from the kiss at the wedding because it was a kiss that did not assume tomorrow. She held the front of his coat for a moment after her hands fisted in the heavy wool, and then she let him go because she was a frontier wife now, and frontier wives let their husbands go. He rode out at 4 in the morning. The lantern on the porch lit her face for the last second she watched him, and then he was gone into the dark, and the snow was already filling in the prints of the gray mare's hooves before she could count to 100. She stayed on the porch until the cold drove her inside. She did not sleep. She sat in his father's chair by the fire with Toby's fevered breathing in the next room and Wesley pacing the kitchen overhead, and she watched the clock on the mantel mark off the hours of the longest night of her life. The first day passed, the second day passed. On the third day, the storm came back. It came down at noon out of a sky that had been clear an hour before, and within 20 minutes, the world outside the kitchen window was a wall of white. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The wind came up off the Wind River range with the sound of a freight train, and Honora went to the window every 15 minutes for 3 hours and saw nothing but snow and snow and snow. She thought he is in that. He is somewhere on Devil's Pass right now in that. She did not say it out loud. Wesley was reading to Toby in the parlor, the same chapter of the same book over and over because it was the only book that kept Toby's fever quiet. Wesley's voice was steady. Wesley's hands, she had noticed, were not. He kept turning the same page back and forth as though he were not really seeing the words. The 4th day. The 5th day. On the morning of the 5th day, with the storm finally broken and the sky a pale, brittle blue, Honora put on her coat and her boots, and she took the rifle down from above the door, and she walked out to the porch with it cradled in her arms. Wesley came out behind her with a cup of coffee in each hand. He gave her one. He is coming back today, she said. He may not be. He is. I will know him before you do. I am his wife. I will see him first. Wesley did not argue. He stood beside her on the porch in the cold morning light, with the coffee steaming up between his hands, and he watched the South Road with her in silence. The sun rose. The sun crossed the sky. By 2 in the afternoon, she had not eaten anything, and she had not gone inside, and Wesley had brought her 3 more cups of coffee and a piece of bread she had not touched. At 3:15, the speck appeared on the road. It was not a horse at first. It was just a moving darkness against the white far away coming slowly. She did not move. She did not lower the rifle. She watched the shape grow. It was a horse. It was a horse with a man on it, but the man was slumped forward in the saddle, and the horse was walking with the heavy stagger of an animal that had been running for too long. She set the rifle against the porch rail. She walked down the steps. She walked across the yard in her thin boots with her shawl flying open behind her, and she did not feel the cold. He fell out of the saddle when he reached the hitching post. She caught him. She could not have caught him under any other circumstances because he was twice her weight, and frozen stiff besides. But love is a strange engine, and she got under his arm, and she eased his fall, and she lowered him onto the snow, and she put both her hands on his face, and his face was the color of marble. Ezra, Ezra, look at me. His eyes opened. They were very far away. He worked his mouth twice before sound came out. In the saddlebag. What? The saddlebag. The medicine. I have it. Do not lose it. She turned her head and shouted toward the porch, and Wesley was already there, already taking the saddlebag reading, already running for the house. She stayed on her knees in the snow, with her husband's face in her hands. You came back. I told you I would. You told me you would. A man keeps his word, Nora. A man keeps his word. She got him into the kitchen. Wesley got the medicine to Toby. Dr. Larkin's note, written in a careful old hand on the back of a Cheyenne hotel letterhead, gave them the doses and the schedule, and within an hour, Toby's color had begun to come back, and within 3 days, his fever had broken. The bones would heal. The doctor's note had said so. The bones would heal because a brother had gone over Devil's Pass in February to bring the medicine home. Ezra slept for 16 hours. When he woke, he could not feel his fingers for 2 days. The frostbite would leave him with a stiffness in his right hand for the rest of his life. He never complained. He counted it a small price. 2 weeks later, when Toby could sit up against pillows and speak almost normally, he asked Honora to come into his room. She came. She brought him a bowl of broth. He took the bowl. He set it aside. He took her hand in both of his, and he held it against the rough wool of the blanket on his chest. And he looked up at her with his eyes very bright. "Sister, I have to tell you something. The night I broke my legs, I did not slip on a heifer. I slipped because I saw a man on the ridge across the south pasture. A rider, black hat, watching me. When I turned my head to look back, I lost my footing on the ice. He was there and then he was gone. I have been turning it over in my head for 2 weeks. He was there, Nora." She did not speak for a long time. Hiram strode. Yes. She took the bowl back into her own hands. She set it down on the bedside table. She went to find Ezra. He came at dusk on a clear, cold day in the second week of March, with the snow beginning to soften at the edges and the first hint of mud on the road. He rode straight up the lane to the front of the house, and he stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch, and he held both his hands up in the air to show that they were empty. "Holloway, I want to talk." Ezra came out onto the porch with the rifle. Wesley came around the side of the house from the barn. Toby was in his bed inside, but he had insisted on the door being left open so he could hear, and Honora stood in the kitchen with her hand on the back door, ready to bolt it if she had to. The man on the horse looked older than 31. He looked like a man who had been running for 7 years and had not slept well in any of them. His face was thin. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had taught himself a long time ago not to feel certain things. "My name is Hiram Strode. You know who I am. I know who you are. I am not here to fight. I am here to make a deal. I have something. I have a small leather book. It is filled with names and dates and places. Some of those names are men I rode with. Some of those names are men who paid me to do things they did not want to do themselves. One of those names belonged to a man called James Cowboy. He was killed 5 years ago. The sheriff hung a drifting sheep tender for it. A man with no family to speak for him. The wrong man. I know this because I was there. Your family is the only family living within 20 miles of where Cobble died. If I send my book to the sheriff with the right note attached, your name will be in it. Your reputation will be dead before summer. So I will take $3,000. You will have it ready in 2 weeks. I will come back on the 15th. After I am paid, I will ride out of this country, and you will never see me again." Ezra did not lower the rifle. He did not raise it either. He spoke very quietly. "Get off my land, Strode. 2 weeks, Holloway. 3,000. He turned his horse and rode out at a slow walk, the way a man rides who is showing he is not afraid. That night, the 4 of them sat at the kitchen table, Toby on the bench with a pillow under his legs, Wesley with his hands flat on the wood, Ezra at the head, Honora across from him. Wesley spoke first. "I will track him. Tonight. I will end this." "No," said Honora. Wesley turned to her. "Wes, listen to me. If you ride out of this house tonight to kill that man, you will come back a different person. Your mother did not raise you to be a killer. She did not. I know it. Your father did not either. Whatever Strode is, he is also a man, and the law will hang him for what he has done if we let the law do it. We will let the law do it." Wesley closed his eyes. He breathed out slowly. He did not argue. Then what do we do? Toby said from the bench. We do not pay him, Ezra said. We bring the law to him. We let him come back on the 15th and we let him reach for that money and we put him in irons in his own saddle. But to do that, we need the sheriff. And to get the sheriff, we need the town. The town will not believe us, Wesley said. They never have. They will believe me, said Honora. 3 pairs of amber eyes turned to her. I will go to Reverend Dunbar tomorrow morning. I will tell him everything. The killing of your parents, why you did not come to the church for 7 years, why he was wrong to refuse them. And I will ask him, as the Christian man he claims to be, to walk into Sheriff Mason's office at my side and tell the sheriff that the Holloway brothers are honest men who have been wronged and that they need help. Nora, Ezra, let me do this. I have spent my whole life with men keeping me at arm's length to protect me. I came here because you wrote me a letter that did not. Let me stand for this family. It is my family now, too. He looked at her for a long time across the table. Go, he said. She rode into Caldwell Flats the next morning at sunrise. The pass was open enough for a single rider. She wore her plain wool dress and her shawl, and she carried nothing but a Bible and her courage. Reverend Hollis Dunbar received her in his front room. He listened. She told him the whole story without weeping and without softening. The 5 men in the yard that summer night in 1872, the 3 brothers, 20 and 23 and 26 years old, defending their parents with their father's hunting rifle. The hill on the north of the ranch where the brothers had buried John and Mary Holloway in the rain because the Caldwell Church would not have them. The 7 years of cold nods and turnbacks in town, and now the man who had killed their parents riding back to extort the orphans he had made. She finished. She folded her hands in her lap. The Reverend was very pale. I did not know, he said. I did not know they buried them themselves. I never asked. Now you know, and I am not asking for sympathy. I am asking for justice. Will you walk with me to the sheriff? He stood up. He picked up his hat from the table. His hands were shaking very slightly. Mrs. Holloway, I have been a poor minister to your husband's family. I have been a worse Christian. Today I will try to be better. Yes, I will walk with you. They walked together down the dusty street of Caldwell Flats to the sheriff's small wood frame office. Sheriff Beauregard Mason was a quiet man in his 50s, with a long mustache and eyes that did not miss much. He listened to her story for almost an hour without interrupting. He took notes. When she was finished, he stood up and went to a tall, locked cabinet in the corner of his office, and he took out a stack of wanted notices, and he laid one of them on the desk in front of her. The face on the notice was Hiram Strode's. The crime was the robbery of a Laramie mail coach in 1878. The reward was $400. Mrs. Holloway, your husband's family has been on my mind for a long time. I always wondered about them. I never had a reason to write out and ask. You have given me one. Yes, ma'am. I will be at your home on the 15th. I will bring 2 deputies. We will end this for your family. The 15th of March came down clear and cold. Hiram Strode rode up the lane to the porch at noon alone with his hand resting easy on the butt of his pistol. Ezra walked out onto the porch and met him. Ezra had a cloth sack in his hand. The sack looked like it might hold $3,000 in coin. It did not. It held river stones the size of silver dollars wrapped tight in burlap. Strode threw open the mouth of the sack. He saw the stones. His face changed. He never finished reaching for his pistol. Wesley was standing behind him by then on the porch, having come around the back of the house and over the porch rail without a sound, and the muzzle of his rifle was pressed against the small of Strode's back. Sheriff Mason stepped out of the barn with his deputies behind him. Strode did not move. Hiram Strode, by the authority of the Wyoming Territory, you are under arrest. They put him in irons. As the sheriff led him to his horse, Strode turned his head and looked back at Ezra one last time and shouted, I have brothers! I have brothers! Holloway! They will come for you! Ezra walked down the porch steps. He stopped 6 feet from Strode's horse. He spoke quietly. Hiram, the men you rode with are dead. Toby killed 2 in the yard that night. I killed the 3rd. The 4th you killed yourself when he became inconvenient to you. There is no one coming for you. You will hang alone. Goodbye, Mr. Strode. Strode did not speak again. They led him away. That night, Honora found Toby alone on the front porch in the dark. He was sitting in the cold with a blanket over his shoulders and his crutches beside him. He was not moving. She thought at first that he was asleep, but when she came closer, she saw that his cheeks were wet. He was crying very quietly the way a man cries when he has held something back for a long time. She sat down beside him on the porch step. She did not say anything. She put her shoulder against his shoulder and she waited. Sister, I was 20 years old. I did not want to kill anybody. I did not. I have kept their names in my head every night for 7 years. I prayed God would take that pain from me. He never did. She took his hand. Toby, listen to me. You were not a killer. You were a boy who was protecting his mother and his father and his brothers. Your mother is in heaven and your mother loves you and your mother is not angry with you. She is proud of you. She wanted you to live and you are living. That is all she wanted. Toby leaned his head against her shoulder. He cried freely than the way he had not let himself cry in 7 years. She held his hand and she watched the stars and she did not let go. After a long while, the kitchen door opened behind them. Ezra and Wesley came out. They sat down on the porch steps without speaking, one on each side of their brother and his new sister, and the 4 of them sat under the cold spring sky together. No one spoke. The wind moved softly through the pines along the north ridge. The mountain above them stood up against the stars the way it always had. Spring came late, but it came. By the first week of April, the South Pass was open. Reverend Dunbar rode out to Blackwater Ridge alone on a clear morning. He stopped his horse at the edge of the yard, and he did not dismount. He held his hat in his hands. I do not expect forgiveness, he said. I want you to know I was wrong 7 years ago, and every year since. Honora came out onto the porch. Reverend, why don't you come inside and have a cup of coffee? He came inside. He sat at the kitchen table where he had never sat before. Wesley joined him. They spoke about books for 2 hours. When the Reverend rode out again at dusk, he left behind on the table his own personal Bible, the one his father had given him 40 years before, with a note tucked into the front cover that read, For Tobias Holloway, a better man than I have been, with my deepest apologies, Hollis Dunbar. Toby read the note alone in his bedroom that night. He pressed the open Bible against his chest. He wept again, but it was a different kind of weeping this time. The summer of 1880 was warm and long. Honora planted a garden behind the kitchen, tomatoes and beans and squash, and the first jar of green tomato pickles she put up at the end of August was the first jar of anything ever put up at Blackwater Ridge by a woman's hand in 8 years. Ezra ate 3 of them at one sitting. Wesley said very seriously that he believed his mother had finally come back to the ranch. In late August, Honora discovered that she was carrying a child. She told Ezra first on the porch at dusk while the cattle were lowing in the south pen. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he laid his hand flat against her belly. Then he said, Thank you. Toby, when he heard, dropped his coffee cup. He spent the rest of the afternoon dancing on his still slightly stiff right leg and singing every Irish song his mother had ever taught him. Wesley said nothing at all. He went up to his reading room. An hour later, he came down with a small wooden cradle in his hands. He had been carving it in secret for 6 weeks. He set it down on the parlor floor, and he said very quietly, For when she sits up, the other one is for when she sleeps. The other one was Ezra's, the one he had been carving the night of the Christmas confession. Mary Holloway was born in February of 1881 in a snowstorm in the upstairs bedroom at Blackwater Ridge, with Dr. Larkin's written instructions on the bedside table and Ezra's hands trembling as he held his daughter for the first time. Mary had Honora's eyes and her father's quiet way of looking at the world. John Holloway came in the summer of 1882, Lillian came in 1887. Toby married a young schoolteacher named Hester May Coltrane, autumn of 1883, and they built a small house on the south boundary of Blackwater Ridge, where they raised 4 children of their own. Wesley never married, but in 1886, a young widow named Adelaide Brookwell came to Caldwell Flats to teach school, and for 2 years, she and Wesley walked together along the prairie roads in the long evenings, and they exchanged books, and they sat reading together in the parlor at the ranch on Sunday afternoons. In the autumn of 1888, Adelaide was offered a position at the new university in Laramie. Wesley walked her to the stagecoach himself. He said to her with both her hands held in both of his, "You have a wider world than this mountain, Adelaide. I have no right to keep you from it." He kissed her forehead. He stepped back. He watched her stage roll out of Caldwell Flats, and he did not weep until he was alone again on the road home. They wrote to each other every month for the next 20 years. She died in the spring of 1908. Wesley kept her letters in a small cedar box under his bed. No one in the family ever asked what was in them. In the summer of 1885, the Caldwell Flats General Store burned to the ground in a kitchen fire that started before dawn. Tilda Harding lost everything she owned. Ezra Wesley and Toby Holloway rode in with 12 other men at first light, and they fought the fire until noon. The store could not be saved. The next morning, Ezra rode back into town alone. He carried with him an envelope containing $800 in banknotes. He found Tilda Harding sitting on the burned step of what had been her home and her business. He sat down beside her. He put the envelope in her hand. He said, "Mrs. Harding, it is a loan. There is no interest. You will pay it back when you can. Build it back." Tilda Harding wept against his shoulder for 10 minutes. He let her. When she could speak, she said, "Ezra Holloway, I do not deserve this kindness from you." He answered her with the words his father had said to a stranger named Silas Crane in a cold creek a long time ago. "Mrs. Harding, a good woman deserves help. That is what a good man does." The years passed. The mountain stood. The ranch grew. 200 head of cattle, then 400, then 600. The 3 Holloway brothers ran it together until the end of their lives, and their children ran it after them and their grandchildren after that. In the autumn of 1909, Honora Whitcomb Holloway, age 54, sat on the porch of Blackwater Ridge with her husband of 30 years. The mountains stood up beyond them the way they always had, white at the peaks, blue at the shoulders. In the yard, Toby, 57, was telling a 4-year-old grandchild a story about how John Holloway had once taught him to shoot a rifle when he was 7. Wesley, 60, sat across the porch reading a letter from Adelaide that he had read 100 times before. On the table beside Wesley sat a copy of the book on the wildflowers of the Wind River Range that he had published with the University of Wyoming Press in 1898. It had been translated into French and German. Ezra, 63, sat next to her with his hand in hers. His knuckles were stiff now from the old frostbite he never spoke of. His shoulders were not quite as broad, but his back was still straight, and his eyes were still amber, and he was still as he had been the first day she saw him, the steadiest man she had ever known. "Do you remember the day you stepped off that stagecoach?" he said. "I remember it like yesterday. What did you think when you saw the 3 of us standing there?" She smiled. "I thought, dear Lord, if these are not good men, I have walked into a nightmare. And were we good men? You were the best men this mountain ever held." He squeezed her hand. She remembered the day she had stepped off that stagecoach into nothing. No husband waiting in any way she had imagined. No house in sight. Just 3 bearded mountain men and 100 miles of wilderness, and a letter she had been afraid was a lie. 30 years later, standing on the porch of the house her husband had built with his own hands, listening to her brother-in-law Toby tell a great-grandchild a story about a great-grandfather the boy would never meet, watching her brother-in-law Wesley read a letter from a woman he had loved enough to set free, Honora Whitcomb Holloway thought one final thing. The letter had not been a lie. It had only not told the whole truth. And the rest of the truth she had lived for 30 years. That was her life. That was their life. And it was enough. Built this together. They had built this together. The mountain stood, the wind moved softly through the pines, and the porch held them all.